Correcting errors is an integral part of teaching. Teachers sometimes find it hard to determine what types of corrective feedback lead students to correct their own errors and to develop their grammatical accuracy and lexical precision within a meaningful communicative context. We will have a look at error correction in the language classroom through several key questions. Should students' errors be corrected? When should students' errors be corrected? Which errors should be corrected? How should errors be corrected? And who should do the correcting? Depending on the focus and purpose of an activity, we can choose between the so-called hot, that is immediate correction, and cold, that is delayed correction. As soon as we notice a student making an error in an accuracy-focused activity, we can ask concept-checking questions that focus on meaning and form. We should avoid giving the answers ourselves and encourage self-correction first and then peer correction. On the other hand, when we are focusing more on oral fluency during a speaking activity, we need to monitor and record the language of the student and focus on the errors when the activity is complete to avoid interrupting the student. How can different correction techniques affect the student's personality? When using hot correction, the student learns that errors are wrong and that there will always be someone to point this out and potentially embarrass them. However, at the same time, when the student comes across another speaker's error, they tend to interrupt and correct them on the spot. From cold correction, the student learns that attempting to perform a task is more important than focusing on errors. However, they also know that there will always be someone to spot the errors and correct them eventually. Self-correction tells the student that they are completely responsible for performing a task and for monitoring themselves while performing the task. Help is provided by none other than their own selves. And with peer correction, the student learns that they belong to a society where one is helping the other and that it is through this mutual support that improvement can be achieved. Types of corrective feedback: explicit correction, recast, clarification request, metalinguistic clues, elicitation, repetition. Explicit correction. Clearly indicating that the student's utterance was incorrect, the teacher provides the correct form. For example, the student says, "Yesterday I must to work late." The teacher says, "That's incorrect. We say, yesterday I had to work late." Recast. Without directly indicating that the student's utterance was incorrect, the teacher implicitly reformulates the student's error or provides the correction. For example, student says, "Do you like a cup of tea?" The teacher says, "Okay, would you like a cup of tea?" Clarification request. By using phrases like "excuse me" or "I don't understand," the teacher indicates that the message has not been understood or that the student's utterance contains some kind of mistake and that a repetition or a reformulation is required. For example, student says, "Can I go out, please?" Teacher says, "I'm sorry, can you try that again, please? I didn't quite understand." Metalinguistic clues. Without providing the correct form, the teacher poses questions or provides comments or information related to the formation of the student's utterance. For example, do we say it like that? That's not how you say it in English. For example, student says, "He didn't went home after school." The teacher says, "Is that how we say it? What form of verb do we need to make negative sentences?" Elicitation. The teacher directly elicits the correct form from the student by asking questions like, "How do we say in English?" by pausing to allow the student to complete the teacher's utterance. For example, it's a, or by asking student to reformulate this utterance like, "Say it again." For example, the student says, "What peron does the next train to London leave from?" The teacher says, "Peron is not an English word. How do we call that place in English?" Repetition. The teacher repeats the student's error and adjusts intonation to draw students' attention to it. For example, the student says, "Sarah have got a new boyfriend." The teacher says, "Sarah have got a new boyfriend?" Let's look at some examples. Situation 1. You are doing a grammar drill to practice the present perfect tense. You ask a student, "Have you ever been to the mountains?" And the student responds, "I've went to the mountains on Austria last year." Obviously, there is a lot wrong in this case, but since the focus is on the drilling of present perfect, I would correct this error immediately after hearing it, using repetition, to draw the student's attention to a mistake. Then I would give the student a chance to self-correct, and if he or she couldn't, I would ask the other students to try and correct him or her. If I didn't get the entire class to provide the correct answer, I would use metalinguistic clues to help them all focus on form. Situation 2. You are doing a warm-up activity with your class. You ask them about their relatives. One student tells the class, "My grandmother is 74." In this kind of a situation, stronger students usually react and step in with peer correction, which leaves me to use metalinguistic clues to get them to think about how we say numbers in English. Since this is a warm-up activity, and they usually help with accessing previous knowledge, if there would be no one who knows the answer to peer correct, I would hold off on correction until the student finishes and then try using recast. I wouldn't ignore it because it is a mistake which could prevent understanding, but if there is no one in the class who knows the answer, then there is a serious problem with saying numbers in general, and there is maybe a need to go over it again. Situation 3. Students are working in groups. Their task is to plan what to do together the following weekend. Several students in different groups are making the same mistake, saying, "We go to a movies" or "We go on a picnic." In this situation, I would use clarification requests while going from group to group and monitoring to help individuals realize that what they are saying isn't conveying the message clearly. If they needed a reminder on the proper structure, I would ask other members of the group to provide help. Situation 4. You are revising tag questions with your class before an exam. You are giving sentences. The students must provide the tag questions. You say, "He arrived yesterday," and point to a student who says, "Isn't it?" The focus of the exercise is accuracy, and this is revision before evaluation, so it is important to focus on the mistake immediately. In this case, I would use repetition first and give the student a chance to self-correct. If that wouldn't lead to the right answer, I would ask others to peer correct, and if there would still be no answer, I would try with metalinguistic clues and elicitation. Situation 5. Your class are involved in a speaking activity in pairs. One student is asking the other to go out for the evening. The student says, "I want to go an Italian restaurant." Since this is a fluency-focused activity, I might even ignore the mistake because it doesn't impede easy understanding, and I wouldn't want to interrupt the flow of the activity. However, if it is repeated several times, then I would focus on the error after the dialogue. Here are some general suggestions. Consider the context. Before you plan systematic error correction practices for your classrooms, you need to consider the context in which student language use and errors occur. Students in the different stages of cognitive development and language acquisition require error correction techniques that are appropriate for their level of understanding. Become aware of your current practices. Teachers can benefit by taking time to find out how they currently address student errors. Ask a colleague or classroom aide to observe you while focusing specifically on your feedback techniques. Or audio record a number of your lessons and reflect on the recording. Practice a variety of feedback techniques. Good teachers understand that one size does not fit all. Individual students may well differ in terms of the particular error correction technique most appropriate for their unique language development needs. Choosing to learn and use a few different types of feedback that seems to produce student-gendered repairs increases your chance of reaching more students. Focus on the student. It is important to let the student self-correct. Remember that your students may well be more capable than you think. As teachers, we often feel an urge to rush in with the correct response before students have had enough time to process the information. If we allow time and provide appropriate cues for the student to self-repair, more often than not, the student will come through. The least effective technique for correcting a student's incorrect language use is to simply give them the answer. And don't forget, mistakes are the portals of discovery. Mistakes obviously show us what needs improving, Without mistakes, how would we know what we had to work on? Be not ashamed of mistakes and thus make them crimes.